Keep your heads in draft FPL mode. There is another waiver deadline coming right up. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 27. Game Week 27, which has its deadline less than 48 hours away now, which means the waiver deadline is less than 24 hours away. As you can see for those watching on screen, the deadline is at 6 p.m. UK time, Monday the 24th of February, ahead of the first games kicking off on Tuesday night. Hence, a slightly unusual time for me to drop a pod on Sunday night. We just saw Liverpool etch another letter on the Premier League trophy with a very no-fuss win away at the Etihad. City were without Erling Haaland. Prior to that, we saw Newcastle and Forest play out a 7-goal thriller, which saw Forest suffer their third Premier League defeat in their last 4 games. Their players are going to be very difficult to value for the remainder of the season when it seems the long-expected drop-off in form may have arrived. Elsewhere, there were some clean sheets to be had. Brentford, West Ham, Wolves, Palace and Brighton all provided us with some welcome 6-pointers, though West Ham and Wolves defenders I doubt would have been gracing many of our draft teams. As ever, if you enjoy this content or if you've just discovered this for the first time and you are big into your draft FPL, give us a thumbs up, make sure you're subscribed, and if you're listening, give us a follow on whichever podcast platform you're listening on so don't miss out on any podcasts that drop at unusual times like now. So, as I alluded, I'm recording this episode on Sunday, 23rd of February, so any team news, injury developments or press conference info are up to date as of then and very much subject to change. Some of the players that I'll be discussing in this episode include Asensio, Souček, Evan Nilsson, plus many more, so let's get straight into it. So, I'll say again, just to hammer it, the waiver deadline is at 6 p.m. UK time on Monday, the 24th of February. So less than 24 hours at the time I'm recording this, with the main game week deadline the following day on Tuesday. So the matches will play over Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. There's then the next round of FA Cup games at the weekend. So we will have then a little break before a return to Premier League action the week after. Let's have a look at Waiver Watch. These are the players that were coming and going in your draft teams last week ahead of game week 26. The players coming in have Minter, Marino, Spence, Vicario, Nwaneri, Sharda, Van Hecke, Lamptey and Veltman. I would say, aside from the Brighton defenders, who I would say, and I said in our Draft FC Discord chat, very much overlooked by me on the last pod to shout out. The rest of them, I think we shouted all of them. Spence was a good pickup. I managed to get him myself. So, solid effort there. And of course, the Brighton lads did get a clean sheet, but they were without Veltman. He was out injured. Can't remember off the top of my head if Lamptey played now, but yeah, Veltman was an unlucky one because he's pretty much solid, but I think he missed out due to a knock. The players that were leaving: Amad Diallo, Madueke, Dizazi, Kinski, Akanji, Garcia, Ramsey, McAllister and Gravenberch. So definitely some upgrades there compared to the ins. So in terms of key injuries and suspensions, the only two main ones to highlight really are a couple of red cards. Lewis Skelly, who's pretty low owned because we don't really like midfielders playing in defence, but he'll be back in game week 28. And Zabani for Bournemouth got sent off, so he will be returning in game week 29. Elsewhere, when it comes to injuries, it's probably more about who's coming back from injury over the next few weeks than who is going off injured. So, we'll have one or two of those names in just a few moments' time. So let's get into the main picks, and starting off with some defenders, a bit of a common thread you'll notice in this episode between a couple of teams. Starting off with one of them, which is West Ham, who will face Leicester at home. As I said, these will not be the last West Ham players that we'll mention in this episode, but suffice to say, there are quite a few I would happily have as mercenaries for this match against Leicester. If I had pick of the bunch, I would take Aaron Wan-Bissaka, whose attacking form has looked as good as it's ever been. After that, I'd have Emerson and either of the centre-backs if I wanted a piece of that clean sheet, and I probably do, to be honest. Similar to West Ham, for the fixture alone, we have to be interested in Chelsea this game week. As poor as they've looked lately, a home game under the lights against Southampton is a great way to get some confidence back. Colwill is the most attainable and nailed defender you will find in the pile. If you're not sure who else to go for, have a look at the predicted lineups. Into midfield, again, sticking with the theme, let's kick off with a couple of West Ham players. And an old friend of the pod is Thomas Souček. Ownership just 31%, so he's available in about 2/3 of leagues. He's West Ham's second top goal scorer in the Premier League with 5 goals, which is 2 behind Jared Bowen's 7, which in itself is probably a very good indicator of how poor West Ham have been this season. Souček hasn't got a return since game week 21, but it's Leicester at home. And then the other one, who is West Ham's 4th top goal scorer in the Premier League this season, with a whopping 3 goals, is Mohamed Kudus, who will likely be up there at the end of the season as one of the most underwhelming and disappointing draft assets you could have picked up in the summer. Just 3 goals and 1 assist for the year so far. The last return was way back in game week 17 before Christmas. Surely he can do something in this game. You'll know if you've listened to the pod for a long time. As a footballer, I'm a big fan of Mohamed Kudus. He's the sort of player I'd happily have sign for Spurs. But if he's going to get that next move away from West Ham and sort of fulfill the promise he showed at times, he's going to have to get more attacking returns than this. So, yeah, as I said, if there's ever an opportunity to try and boost your numbers, a home game against this Leicester team is as good as it gets. And his ownership has been dwindling over recent weeks. I think it was about 85% 6 weeks ago. So it's come down a good old chunk, which means, particularly for those engaged leagues, there will be waiver piles that have Mohamed Kudus in. And I would certainly be very lucky and fortunate to find myself picking him up for a 1-week punt if I could. And then back to the other team that we like, and that's Chelsea for this game week with that home game against Southampton. Starting off with Pedro Neto. Again, it's Southampton at home. 2 returns in the last 3 is definitely better from him. But again, similar to Mohamed Kudus, has had a generally pretty underwhelming year. With Jackson out, Madueke out still, a good chance of another start. Not 100%, but a good chance of another start. We did see Chelsea deploy a back 3 at the beginning in their last outing as a way to, I guess, cover that and play one less midfielder, but it would be incredibly negative, I think, for them to line up in a back 3 or back 5 for this particular fixture, where in theory any 11 that they chuck out should be good enough to get the job done. The other one from Chelsea is Enzo Fernandez, who we've obviously touched on at times when he had that purple patch earlier on in mid-season. Had a bit of a barren spell, to be honest, but again, similar to Neto, he's got 2 returns in the last 3 now and was the benefactor of Neto's assists for the goal against Aston Villa for his 9th attacking return of the season, which is pretty solid for Enzo Fernandez. The advantage of Enzo, I would say, over Neto is I'm more certain he'll start, but we have seen Maresca play a kind of a midweek Chelsea at times this season, but I think with some of the departures and some of the injuries, they probably can't afford to do that and need to try and pick themselves up. The final midfielder to discuss, and our Game Week Player of the Week with 15 points, 2 goals and all 3 bonus points, is Marco Asensio for Aston Villa, who I said very confidently I can't see playing a full 90 minutes in the Premier League this season and would likely end up as a super sub. Wasn't saying that in a disparaging way, but just I didn't think his legs would be able to handle the intensity of 90 minutes of Premier League football. But how wrong I was. Ownership of 32% means he's there for lots of you. I can already see some of the waiver questions I'll be getting about who to drop for him. And for what it's worth, I would drop Marlon for him, I think. The thing that gives me pause here is with the turnaround and the tight turnaround between the games. I wonder if we do see him benched for this one with Marlon and Rashford coming into the starting 11. It could depend on the fitness of Rodgers as to whether or not they need someone else to play behind Watkins, in which case I think Asensio would get the start. Feels like a very good problem to have for Villa, with all these options flying around, but it's going to make it very tricky for us draft managers. But he's looked really good. Him and Rashford's ownership has absolutely rocketed up, so there's no point me mentioning him. But, I think Asensio is definitely getting into that bracket of a player that could really change your fortunes towards the back end and the final run of the season. Onto the forwards, and a surprising big return for Bournemouth was Evan Nilsson. He was on the substitute bench for their defeat against Wolves. Missed the last 6 Premier League games. I, along with many others, had him penciled in for a return in around game week 30 into April. But he was, as I said, back on the bench, didn't come on, didn't make an appearance at all, which possibly doesn't bode well necessarily for him starting on Tuesday evening away at Brighton. But I'd expect him to get some minutes off the bench with a view to then hopefully use that 12-day gap before game week 28 to get him fully fit for a start. Comments from Iriola after the game suggested that if they were not down to 10 men and if the game was in a bit of a different state, he may have had a run out yesterday, but just decided, probably rightly so, that it wasn't worth risking him. Now, as much as this news could provide you with a brand new legit striker option in the waiver pile, and as you can see, his ownership has dipped to 50%, which is excellent if you could pick him up this week. The other thing we have to consider is the knock-on effect to some of the other Bournemouth attackers we've become quite attached to in recent weeks, not least Draft FC favourite Dango Ouattara, who has obviously been the main benefactor of Evanilson's absence. Now, we did see Brooks dropped for Tavernier, as I predicted, but obviously the game plan kind of fell apart a bit after Zabani's red card. Once they're all back, once all those starting options are back, I think we could still see Dango starting games in one of the wider positions, forming a front three with Evanilson and Semenyo. I think Tavernier will get plenty of starts. Brooks will likely fall slightly back in the pecking order and become a bench option again. But I don't see it as a complete bust if you have got Dango Ouattara. But the earlier return for Evanilson does just harm his value ever so slightly. The other striker to mention who isn't quite back from injury yet is Dominic Calvert-Lewin. Indications would suggest he's about a game week or two away from getting back into the squad. It's really a name for those who are in dire need of a forward option. But if Beto continues in the form that he has shown over the last few weeks, then there is absolutely no way DCL gets back into the starting 11 anytime soon. As ever, do comment below any players I haven't mentioned that you're interested in this week. Let's rattle through a few hidden gems, starting with the defence. Semedo owned in just 8% of 10-team leagues. Wolves have a home game against Fulham. The Wolves defence I see as a bit of a backup option on the waivers this week, and the kind of player that could, is a needs-must last-minute free agent move in, should there be any press conference info or team news that suggests you need to make a late change. Really in a similar bracket is the Brentford defence, and I've highlighted Aya here. Ownership just 7%. They've got a home game against Everton, but Everton, including Beto, we just talked about, have looked very good recently. So this is another very much a backup option. I'd have them even below Wolves if I was scrabbling around for a defender. And then finally is Tosin for Chelsea. Will heavily depend on the fitness of Trevor Chalobah, who went off injured early in that Aston Villa game on Saturday. But if there is a suggestion that he will miss out, then Tosin becomes a very good one-week punt for their defence. In midfield, the only one that I actually had any kind of enthusiasm to talk about this week was Abdoulaye Doucouré. I had him a couple of weeks ago for the double, and he served me well, got a return in that. And like me, many of you who did own him will have rightly dropped him for his suspended game 25. But straight back in at the weekend, and a goal and an assist against Man United shows a continuation in the good form he's shown since Moyes has taken over. This definitely looks like the Doucouré we're more familiar with from previous seasons. And for those of you who are in sort of 12 to 16 team leagues, definitely the kind of player that's becoming too good to leave in the waiver pile. And then finally, it only took him to get about 3 minutes off the bench a couple of weeks ago for the messages to start coming in from the hordes of Man United fans that exist out there, is Chido Obi Martin. Now, he's a forward option. It's going to get minutes off the bench, so definitely an option for those larger leagues. Given how poor Højlund's been over recent months, you never know. He could get a start, and if he did, it's a very nice game on paper at home to Ipswich, though for Man United at the moment, all games are a bit of a struggle. That's pretty much all I've got to say about him. Definitely one to consider for the big leagues. I wouldn't go dropping any of the big names if you're in like an 8, 9, 10 team league, for example. And finally, the most hidden gem pick this week is Marshall Menetzi for Wolves. Now, I gave him a very brief nod in the January signing section a few weeks ago and said, not one to worry about. He's a defensively minded central midfield player and won't factor into our draft thinking. Fast forward to now, and he's on the list. And at the weekend, he lined up as the Wolves' false 9. and got his first attacking return. So full debut, first assist for Wolves, setting up the winner, which was Cunha's goal. Wolves played very well in that game, but were obviously helped by the sending off of Bournemouth's Zabani. Even so, it would seem to me they will want to deploy him somewhere in the midfield in the next game against Fulham in midweek. Fulham's form has been very up and down, and I think Wolves will fancy themselves to get a result in that one. I'm expecting Strand Larsen to come back in for his first start since returning from injury, and I reckon they'll probably have him being supported in their usual formation with Cunha and Munetsi just playing in behind him. So bad news if you picked up Sarabia or Guedes, or if you have got them, probably worth moving them on. It is a tight turnaround, so they very much could get a start. You don't know how some of these players are going to react after a 2-day break. But point of the most hidden gem section is players with very low ownership. Now, this guy, even in 16-team leagues, is pretty much not owned. I think there are literally, you can count on one hand how many leagues out there actually have Munetsi picked up. So he could become part of a very formidable lineup for the remainder of the season, and one of those players that, if you are in one of those very big leagues, you maybe don't want to turn your back on. If you're needing to get points, if you've got ground to make up in the league, could be one of those players you pick up and look back on at the end of the season as someone that really turned around your fortunes. Predicted lineups at this very moment have not been done. Hopefully by the time you're listening to this, they will have been. So have a look over there to see who I think will start and who will get a rest. If you see any rogue picks, just assume it's because I'm trying to predict a bit of rotation between now and the very tight turnaround. So if there's no reason otherwise that they would miss out, that's probably why. So that is it for this episode. Another reminder, the waiver deadline is less than 24 hours away at 6 p.m. UK time. So make sure you're penciling in moves ASAP. If you're listening to this on Sunday night, pencil some moves in already. You don't know how busy your Monday is going to be. And before you know it, the deadline will have been and gone, and you'll have lost ground on some of your league rivals. So do that now. Again, like and subscribe and follow on whichever platform you're listening or watching on, so you don't miss out on any future content as it drops. If you are big into your official FPL draft and you haven't checked out draftfc.co.uk yet, do head over there. As well as all the stuff we offer, the other thing you will get is a VIP pass into our Discord server, where you'll be part of the community and be able to chat with everyone, including myself, about any last minute problems you have. I say I can't be on there 24/7, so most of the help comes from the rest of the community, which continues to grow and flourish, which is great to see. So we'll leave things there in the interest of time. Best of luck ahead of Game Week 27. Hope you get the players you want, and until next time, stay sure.